Nothing fresh was what I was searching for. Not at 49. Not after I'd watched my marriage deteriorate over the years like stale bread on the counter. In our little village I had established a peaceful life. I had music and my two boys, one of whom was already a college student and the other too busy to do much but play soccer. My sole audience that never responded was the piano, which also served as my companion and confessional. He initially entered my home studio on a Tuesday afternoon. Eli was his name. His age was 22. Recall. Thinking he appeared too young to be a serious musician, much less drive himself. However, he walked with a certain confidence that was not hot-toddy, as if they have experienced disappointment and handled it well. He grinned when I held out my hand. He had a warm grasp. "Kine, you're 4:30, he added. Eli gave a nod. "My name is Blair. Let's examine our current situation." He rolled his shoulders, sat down at the piano, and suddenly began to play. Although it wasn't flawless, it wasn't amateur. Occasionally his fingers faltered, but the emotion was unadulterated there. Although he didn't always have the words, he played with a sense of profound emotion. I stared at him for a long time after he was done. "You've performed previously?" He gave a shrug. "Few years back I had an instructor." He took a step back, gave a nod. "Well, you're not beginning from the beginning. It's a relief. The weeks pass like a metronome. Sluggish turns. Eli would show there at 4:30 every Tuesday and Thursday, occasionally with coffee. Sometimes it's just a silent male. Always ask questions." He was longing for something more profound than ill. He once questioned, "Have you ever had the impression that the piano knows more about you than people do?" Chuckled at all times. His gaze remained fixed on me as he drew in closer. "Do you ever perform for your own enjoyment, or only for other people?" Question was straightforward. It landed hard, though, as it had been years since I had performed for myself. It was more than just the tunes. He listened that way to me, not simply to notes. How I moved when I was exhausted. When I spoke about my boys, my voice grew quieter. The way I didn't stare at my husband's photos in the corridor. He pointed to an old vacation picture of us one day. I was wearing my husband's arm around my waist. I had my head thrown back, laughing. Eli remarked, "You look different there." "Stop. That was quite a while ago." He observed me. "Not that long." It was innocuous. Told myself he was nice, wondering, paying attention, and I was, "What are you? Starving? Feeling lonely?" Perhaps both. He lingered one evening following an especially tearful class. We discussed dreams, loss, and music. The air felt more dense than normal. He didn't immediately take a step back when he turned to say goodbye. As I led him to the door, he spoke softly. "Enjoy picking your brains." I grinned, experiencing a warmth I hadn't had in years. "I also enjoy instructing you." The hush grew as we stood there. Then he went away. Long after he had left, though, I remained at the door, wondering when the lessons had begun to signify anything different. I made an effort to ignore the way he gazed at me that evening. During the day, when I had work, emails to reply to, bills to pay, and dishes to wash, it was simpler. There was a rhythm to life, and if I followed it, I could act as though nothing was changing underneath. However, I would find myself in front of the piano once again at night when the home was peaceful and the boys were either asleep or out late. I would unintentionally perform the same song we had worked on together, which was slow, delicate, and too emotional. It was only music, I reassured myself. Eli wasn't alone. Himself. When I opened the door one Thursday, he introduced himself as Nora, my girlfriend. She was stunning young. Course, I was previously confident in. The way I recalled, I ushered them in. With a courteous grin. Disinterested in the lesson, Nora sat on the couch and took out her phone. Eli was sitting at the piano as usual, but something had changed about him. His fingers were racing over the scales and he was noisier and less focused. Decelerate, Here you're not proving anything. His eyes softened for a time as he gazed at me. I apologize. Nora scarcely acknowledged me as she got up. At the end of the lesson, Eli stood beside the door. See you on Tuesday. Gave a nod, obviously, but I felt a constriction in my chest. Had no idea what I had anticipated. Perhaps I had overlooked the fact that he lived outside of this room. The lessons that followed were different. We spoke less, concentrated on technique. He no longer brought coffee. I ceased to inquire. Convinced myself that this was better, cleaner. Then it rained one afternoon. Violent thunderstorm quickly moved in. The power went out halfway through the bless. I apologized for the atmosphere. As I lit candles, Eli merely chuckled. He sat back down at the keys and remarked, "To be honest, I like it this way. Feels honest." He improvised a quiet piece of music to help him with his hands. I sat next to him on the bench, too near. I could feel his heat, heard the way my fingertips touched his, and his breath caught. I hurried to my feet. That's enough for today. He didn't dispute, simply packed his belongings. Slowly, he turned at the door. Ended things with Nora, he muttered. Remained silent. I just watched him go. I poured a glass of wine for myself and sat on the balcony that evening. Rain had ceased. It was a strange kind of silence, similar to the silence before a break. Buzzed on my phone. Eli texted, "Thank you for today. Additionally, we shouldn't act as though we don't feel this." I didn't respond. However, I also didn't remove it. Rather, I gazed at the text until the words became hazy, until my fingers began to shake. I was a mom, a spouse, an almost 50-year-old woman. But here I was waiting for Tuesday once more. Should have anticipated his early arrival. It was October 3rd, a Tuesday. Outside, the leaves had started to turn. The kind of red and gold that evokes memories of things you can't quite put your finger on. I was already playing a gentle tune at the piano. Something incomplete, something that was only intended for me. Without waiting, he knocked and let himself in. Now he did that every time. Have I interrupted? Placing his backpack on the chair, Eli. I made a little turn. Getting warmed up. This time he did not sit at the keyboard. He took a seat on the bench next to me. Once more too close. Unspoken things float across the air between us. You have been aloof, he remarked. Have exercised caution. He gave a nod until now. Have to. Actually did look at him. 22, eyes that were too ancient for his years. In that moment I felt old. The weight I carried. A husband who hardly touched me anymore. Sons who didn't need me. This deadly live creature sitting next to me like a confession was more significant than the number. I muttered, "I'm not who you think I am." He gave a headshake. "You don't have to be anything but genuine for me." He then gave me a. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't careless. It was tender, painful, and so restrained that it nearly got worse. Ought to have stopped him. I should have told him that this couldn't happen and shoved him away, kissed him back. Instead, we didn't take off our clothes. We remained on the piano bench the entire time. The open window allowed in the smell of turning leaves and the distant sound of someone mowing a lawn. But we just stayed there, hearts beating, lips barely touching. Cancelled all of my other lessons for the following day. I need a break, I told myself. In actuality, I was unable to hear someone else's voice without hearing myself. That night Eli sent me an SMS. Your hands are still in my grasp. I didn't respond. However, I kept playing the same tune while I sat at the piano, the one he preferred. I would never allow any student to hear it. Friday arrived. He was unexpected. However, he returned to the porch at 4:30. No rucksack, no music, only him. When I opened the door, I remained silent. I didn't have to. He gave me another kiss, this time longer, more slowly. He ran his fingertips over my jaw as if I were a delicate object, as if I would shatter if handled too quickly. Finally, we arrived at the living room. We failed to reach the bedroom. Sex wasn't the topic. Not it. Had to do with touch, about getting noticed, about hearing someone who truly means it speak your name like prayer. We then sprawled on the couch, entangled. I wondered what I had just done as I gazed at the ceiling. He declared, I'm not asking for forever. Now is all I want. And that was the issue. I couldn't think about later, 'cause I felt so good right now. Shadows of us were always there when I passed the couch, huddled together in stillness, breathing like though we had just escaped something rather than running into it. Something changed in that room. No longer a living room now. Place filled with memory. Nobody had requested this confession. The following week Eli returned, but this time we didn't discuss music. First, we didn't discuss much of anything. We didn't eat the pastries. He brought brewed tea and let it cool. We were seated in an unnamed room. He extended his hand to grasp mine and I didn't resist. We shared a kiss. We made contact, like lines carved in sand. We repeatedly crossed invisible lines. Always thought this is the last time. However, it was never. I would still lie by my husband at night, unaware of how far I had wandered. He would go off to sleep as the television hummed. He wasn't mean. He wasn't reckless. He simply vanished. We had become strangers as a result of years of quiet dinners, habit and holding back. Sometimes I wanted to scream and hope not in rage. Hoped he would give me another look, pose a query, listen to my quiet. However, he didn't. Thus I allowed another person to hear me. Eli began to play more daring pieces, romantic ones. He would sit at the piano and stare at me as if the notes weren't important enough, as if I were the tune he was attempting to learn by heart. What are we doing? He questioned. One afternoon, I went cold. I was reluctant to give it name. It would require a decision to be named. We acting, I murmured. He scowled. Feels real to me. Whispering. Feels like a dream to me. He took a step toward her. What if it's not necessary? Chuckled. Not because it was amusing, however, because it was painful. Eli, I can be your mother since I'm old enough. You aren't, he stated. You're the first person who has actually seen me. I said I also kept from him the fact that he was the first person to see me in years. The holidays were coming up. The buzz of returning college mails and the aroma of cinnamon permeated the premises. Eli's classes were cancelled by me. It was too busy, I told him. He didn't dispute. However, I was tormented by the expression in his eyes when I said farewell. In a gradual confession, the snow melted. Buds protruded from the branches like stale breath. Something softened the light making it warmer but also more lonesome. It had been Christmas when I last saw Eli. Not face to face. We exchanged a few brief, thoughtful texts, each with the following underlying question. Are you okay? Are you still considering me? Have you moved on? We didn't inquire. We didn't respond. Ended up dusting the piano one morning. I was playing notes I didn't intend to recall as my fingertips hovered over the keys. Without him, the bench felt chilly, empty as no object ought to be. With his coffee in hand, my husband entered. He remarked, "You're playing again." Gave a nod. He sat silently on the other side of the room. However, his gaze remained fixed on me as if he was also struggling to recall anything. We hadn't discussed our distance from one another. We never got into a fight. We never shed a tear. However, we had gradually drifted apart like tectonic, unavoidable land masses. He reached for me in bed that night, not with fervor, not even with a desire, only with a sort of recall, a long-lost touch echo. Gave him permission. I then wondered how many kind of silence a human might endure while staring at the ceiling. Few weeks later, I ran into Eli at the grocery store. He had changed. Appearance a bit older. The jaws sharper. He was with a girl who might have been his age or younger. He had said something that made her giggle. He failed to notice me. Like a child, I held my breath as I stood motionless next to the canned soups. Finally, I let out a breath and stepped out, leaving the cart behind. I refrained from crying. I didn't go back. Life has now regained its shape. The lads occasionally returned home. Even when I tell him not to, my spouse continually leaves his socks in places still waiting in the same corner of the room as the piano. However, something altered. Not in me alone, in my perception of silence. I listened to find out what's lacking. I still dream about him occasionally. Not the physical contact, not the heat. However, he observed me playing as if I were a worthwhile song. I also occasionally use the sheet music he handed me when I'm alone myself. Still nothing. I'm still waiting. And I let my fingers to locate the keys one by one, honestly, slowly, as though perhaps this time the remainder will be written by me. I discovered a little box on my porch on Christmas Eve. Not a word, only a ribbon. It was a sheet of music inside, with the exception of a title scribbled across the top. Is blank for Claire. You never permit yourself to play that song. That's when I started crying. Not out of remorse. Not out of fear, but since I didn't even realize I wanted it.